Well, for the last two years, my son and I have been taking lessons and been sailing up and down the Boston Harbor, Gloucester, Rockport, having a lot of fun. Some point. All right, so let's talk about the project. So one of the requirements for this course is for you to team up with two other folks and work together, implement a project of your choosing. So you're free to choose what the domain is, and also you're free to choose if this is going to be a desktop application, if this is going to be a phone app or web app. You're free to choose whatever you want. Right? So if you've taken all the courses and you know how to build phone applications or web applications, feel free to bring all that to bear in this project. It's not we're not going to grade you for look and feel and more on usability or functionality. Does it do what it's advertised that it can do? But we're not going to grade you for look and feel, your color schemes or anything like that, or fonts, but definitely functionality. So we're asking you to choose two human actors in your project that represent specific use cases, right? Where each one has a specific set of use cases and goals that they want to achieve, right? And if you would interview them, they would tell you, the things that they do from day to day, and you have to create a use case diagram, describing all the use cases and explaining, how do they achieve those use cases. From those use cases, you'll come up with a set of nouns and verbs, and come up with a class diagram that describes all these use cases, the data model needed for fulfilling all these use cases. In addition to that, there has to be an additional admin role, who has God powers. They can do everything. They can create all instances of anything, of any type of entity that you might have. Needs to be able to update, delete, all the CRUD operations on any data model that you have decided on. So examples of the two human users, there might be, if you choose to implement some kind of store application, there will be some sellers and buyers. If it's a project management application, there might be developers, quality assurance folks, project managers, business analysts, each one with their own use cases. If it's a restaurant, cooks, waiters, delivery, receptionists, and each one would have different use cases, right? If it's sports, players, coaches, directors, spectators, fans, whatnot. So as an admin, so it has to support some kind of login mechanism where folks can identify themselves, and depending on how they identify, the use cases would be available depending on what the role is, what type of user you are, right? If you're a user admin, then I should be able to have accessibility of being able to CRUD everything, CRUD users. If it's a movie application, then I should be able to CRUD movies, actors, Oscars, whatever, reviews, whatever you choose your domain is. If you're a particular user, so if you're an actor, well, you can only do certain things, right? If you're a fan, then you can do only certain things, right? So only those things should be available depending on who you log in and you identify yourself as. Right. So those two human actors, we refer to them as end user roles, right? So a fan, an actor, a cook, a waiter, right? Those are all end users who would actually be using your application. There's the admin folks, right? That they are not end users, right? They are, they're part of the organization, right? And they presumably have access to every part of the data model. So as an end user role, you should be able to do a subset of the CRUD operations, right? If you're a seller, perhaps you should be able to create new products, You should be able to edit those products, remove the products, change their price, their description. If you're a buyer, then you can't edit the product, right? You can buy the product, you can put it in a shopping cart, you can review the product, right? So you have a completely different set of use cases for your particular role, right? For the data model, definitely you need to have you have to be able to capture information about the user. Typically there'll be some base class that represents your user class, and then perhaps two subclasses that inherit from this base class, right? The buyers and the sellers. They all have first names, last names, social security number, whatnot, right? But somebody might have other attributes that the other one does not. Yes? Or maybe a student and a faculty. So one of them might have an office, but the other one does not have an office. One might have a graduation year, but the other one doesn't, right? And whatnot. Yes? So yeah, you need two types of users. Domain objects, there's a generic term for non-human objects, right? Movies, reviews, anything that is non-human that you're representing in your data model. So you need two humans. You also need two domain objects. Right? The domain object might be they might be related to one another. Maybe it's a song is a domain object. Yes, and maybe a playlist is another domain object. A playlist can contain many songs. So you need to come up with at least two domain objects. Once you have at least, you can have more. But once you have these this minimal, 4 classes in your data model, you need to define all sorts of types of relationships, right? You have to have at least one user-to-user relationship. You can choose whether it's a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship. You choose what it means. Okay, a user-to-user relationship might be perhaps a manager and the employees. Right? An employee a manager is an employee, and you can have a relationship as in somebody is managing some other person, right? Or one of the easier ones is somebody's following somebody, right? Also, you have to have at least one user to domain object relationship. So a user to a domain. So I am reviewing a movie, right? So that the review is a relationship between a human user, right, and a non-human object, right, a movie. So relationships, you're free to choose how is it that you're going to model that relationship. If it's a many-to-many table, right? You're also free to choose either if you want to do a relational database, or if you want to do a non-relational database. Right? So if it's a non-relational database, you can do many-to-many in a different way. You don't have to have a mapping table or mapping collection in between. Right? You can have arrays of foreign keys as well. No such thing in relational databases. You have to have at least one domain-to-domain relationship. Right? Maybe like a playlist can contain many songs. Right? So that's a relationship between two non-human objects, or two non-human classes. You have to have at least one-to-one relationship, at least one-to-many, at least one many-to-many. So each one of the data of the modeling that we've seen so far, at least one self-reference, meaning a table that references itself, right? That it has a foreign key that references a primary key in the same table. So some kind of hierarchy. It could be maybe categories. If this is a products, right? You could have a product table that contains, electronics and medicines, right? And under the electronics, you can have, computers, TVs, and whatnot, and you can have like a hierarchy of categories. Yes. So at least one self-referencing, at least one generalization where you have a base class, and then you can have one subclass that inherits from this base class, and at least one enumeration. Enumeration using what it's called the portable enumeration. I think we covered. I don't know if you remember. Did we cover? Okay, we'll take a look at that. So enumerations using the portable implementation of enumerations, not not specific to any particular vendor. So here's just a couple examples. This is a very generic example where you have all types of relationships. Here you have a self-referencing, right, where you have a user referencing itself. This might be somebody is following somebody, or no, actually no. This is somebody managing somebody, right? Like a hierarchy of users. This is more like somebody's following somebody, right? So this is a mapping table that says, who's following who, or somebody's reviewing some other user, right? A list of friends, whatever. Here's a base class, and then you have two subclasses inheriting from a base class, and here's an association, mapping to mapping between two users, not necessarily the same user, but it's mapping two users. Then you have a user to a domain object, and that domain object, it could be a one-to-many relationship, right? Or it could be a many-to-many relationship between users and domain objects. Again, this is very generic. Doesn't mean that you're going to implement all of this, right? But this is what it would look like if you would. Then you have here's a one-to-many relationship between a domain object and another domain object, and here's a many-to-many relationship between a domain object and some other domain object, and a hierarchical structure of a domain object containing other domain objects. So pretty much everything's here, right? All the various. Obviously, it's generic. You would need to replace this with actual classes. Yes. Self-reference? Yeah. So if this is non-humans, right? The category example I just mentioned earlier, right? Where you have a table, a category table, and one row represents a particular category. So the category might be electronics, right? And it could be a parent category to many subcategories, right? So all those subcategories would have foreign keys pointing to their parent category. So, for instance, under electronics, you might have TVs, you might have computers, you might have whatever, right? So as a row. So those rows would have a foreign key that points to a primary key to electronics, right? And electronics would point to some row at the top, maybe called products. And if the product is a very generic category that has the root of this hierarchy, then its parent would be null, right? Because it has no parent. Right? So that's one way of representing hierarchical representations with a flat table. Okay. So the same example you could do for users, right? In an employee table, you could have maybe the board of directors and the CEO. So the CEO's boss is the board of directors. Then the VPs, reference the CEO, and then you have all the division presidents, pointing to their VPs and whatnot, right? So you create this hierarchy. Make sense? Here's just some other really quick examples. A buyer and a seller, they might message each other, send messages. A buyer can follow other buyers because they've reviewed things, and they might say, "Oh, this guy writes really good reviews." They can create many reviews. To many products. A seller can have many stores. Each store they can add different products. Products can be organized in sub-products in a category. Here's another example of a base person and a faculty and a student. Again, they can send messages to each other, and the faculty can author many courses, and the faculty can also teach many sections for many courses. And you can have the student enrolled in many sections that are taught by different faculty, right? So these are just some examples. Here's another one where you might have a base class of a person, and you have an artist and a creator of different exhibits and galleries, and the artist might have several types of. They might showcase their art in different venues. They might have their own portfolio. They might have just a long list of the art pieces that they've are keeping track of. They can showcase their art in a particular exhibition. There's all sorts of types of art. There's hand-drawing art, there's performance photos, written, audio, and hand-drawn. There's sketches, charcoal, oil. And then you have the curator on the other side that curates a lot of galleries, a lot of presentations there. And the galleries can have many exhibitions of which the artist can be an exhibitor in that particular exhibition. So anyway, so these are just some really simple examples on what these might be. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, we'll revisit that when we get to NoSQL, and we'll say, hey, remember when we did it for relational databases, and a lot of the limitations that we point out of saying, oh, look, in relational database you can only do this, but now that you have non-relational databases, look, you have all these other ways of doing doing the same thing. Not only can you do what relational database could do, but you can also now have these other options. Whether you would do it or not, that's another issue. We'll talk about pros and cons of the different options. Sure. Yeah. I would. So the first things that we ask you to do for the project is to come up with, the UML, all the use cases, all the SQL or queries that you're gonna need. Some of the optimization of primary keys and indexing that you're going to need anyway for the types of queries you're going to need. So sure, yes, shortly after when we come back from when we do the midterm and we'll start looking at NoSQL. Yes.
I'm not sure if this was mentioned at the beginning, but is this individual is actually with our team members?
You're with your team members. Yeah, all project-related assignments are team efforts. Yep. Feature requirements. So these are just some of the minimal user interface. Again, however you want to do this. If this is a desktop application, if it's a phone application, or if this is some kind of web. It doesn't have to look pretty. It has to be functional, right? It needs to be able to do what it's supposed to say, right? You should have some kind of landing page that kind of describes what the project is, and maybe has links that allow you to navigate to all the different parts of your application. Very functional. Yeah, just functional. Stay with functional. Some place for you to be able to register and create new users and then identify yourselves as that particular user. Some way for users, once they've identified themselves, to modify their profile. And within that profile, if that person is associated to a whole bunch of other things, everything that person is associated to, right? Any users that they're following, any reviews that they've written, anything that person is logged in should be somehow accessible from the profile. Okay, so if I've liked a movie, then there should be a list of all the movies that I've liked. If I am following somebody, the list of all the people that I'm following should be accessible through the profile. Yes? All right, so from the profile, I should be able to access anything that is related to the person who's logged in. There should be, all right, so another requirement is that we need data. We need real data. So there's two sources of you can represent that data in two ways. One, the data should be either accessible through some third-party API that you can query and retrieve it dynamically on the fly, or you can decide to instead download that data somehow, right? Either as comma separated values, or XML, or JSON, or however you find it, right? And you need to import that data into your database. Yes? That data should be substantial enough that it should be you should be able to demo so that it's as realistic as possible. Right? If you just have just a couple of records and I search for something and nothing comes back, then well, what data is there, right? So you should have plenty of data so that if I search for some weird stuff, it should display there. Something should display. Okay. Or you might decide to instead point to some third-party API, and where the data is owned by someone else, and what you do is just interact with it, and you would only store something in your database if there is anything to remember, right? If somebody is perusing through a whole bunch of restaurants, unless somebody likes something, there's nothing for you to store in your database. Yes? Right? If you're just navigating around and just perusing around, there's nothing to store in your database. Only when somebody says, "Ooh, this restaurant was really good." Now you have to store that. It says, "Ooh, this person said that this restaurant is good. I need to store that somewhere." Right? I need to see if that record already exists for that restaurant. See if it already exists. Then I just need to insert some kind of relationship saying that this person liked that restaurant. If it doesn't exist, then I need to insert this new restaurant. Yes. So you have to keep track of data in your local database, even though the data lives elsewhere, right? Since typically these whatever endpoint you choose, typically they won't let you write or update or manipulate the remote data, right? You'll have to augment whatever data they have remotely with your own data in your own database. Yes. Okay. So anyway, one of the requirements is that you should be able to search some criteria. You should be able to provide some filtering criteria that allows you to retrieve records that meet some predicate. Right? It could be a free-form query, or it could be a form that you need to fill out, right, with drop-downs and checkboxes and input fields. That then you click search, and then it comes back with some results. Right? The results should be somewhat like in a summary format, where each record might have dozens of fields, but the summary might be just 3 or 4 fields that make it easy to display in some kind of tabular format. Yes, or grid or something. I should be able to choose one of these items, right? Whether it's a recipe, or it's a sports team, or movies, or whatever. Okay, I should be able to choose these items, and then fetch more data about that particular item that we chose. Okay, so if it's a movie, I would want to know maybe pictures for the movie, or sample videos, or reviews for that movie, or who the director was, and the plot, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Yes, so that's in the details screen. In the details screen, again, it's dynamic. I retrieve data from my database and I display this. Again, it doesn't need to be pretty. It has to be functional. Right? Don't waste too much time making this. It has to be functional. The web service, again, you can either download it or you can retrieve it directly from some API. This is a good place to start looking for these APIs, for these data sources. Make sure to stay with data that is freely available. Don't need to pay for any of this data. If you choose to download it, make sure that you have permission to use whatever that data is for the purposes of whatever you're doing with it. Keep it PG. User management. So the administrator, the admin role needs to be able to manage users. Create users, update users, delete users. Deliverables. So you can use any of these tools for drawing UML elements, UML diagrams, and you need to deploy or make available your source code in a GitHub repository, in a private GitHub repository, and name 5200. The term for us is F19, fall 2019. Your last name and your first name, and all your source code should be available there, right? And there should be instructions for the TAs to be able to clone down your environment, right, and run it locally on your machine, on their machines. Okay, there should be a wiki in your GitHub with one page called design, and in that design there should be all your UML class diagrams, any sequence diagrams, any documentation that we need to understand your project. Your class diagram should have cardinalities, classes, model additional roles, domains, all the different relationships. So also another requirement is that there should be one page called testing. In that page, there should be very detailed steps on how to validate all your using your application to validate all these requirements. So somewhere in that wiki, you should tell us how should I validate that you are supporting the one-to-one relationship, right? And you will tell us step by step what the TA needs to do, using your remote, your application, how to validate that. How do I validate that there's a one-to-many? How do I validate that it's a many-to-many? Right? You will be very verbose. Say step 1, log in as Alice, right? Navigate to her profile. Click here, click there. You should see this. You should see that. Okay? If we agree with you that that's indeed demonstrates that you have a many-to-many relationship, you get credit for that. Okay? So there should be a testing wiki page that describes exactly how to test all the requirements. A 5 to 10 minute video. I used to have folks come up here and present their projects, and that just took forever. So instead, just a 5 to 10 minute YouTube video. Doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to. It doesn't. Not everybody has to speak. It could be always the same person presenting the whole thing. But at least like a minute introduction, problem statement, your solution, your really quick architecture, and this is a kind of walk us through if there's anything that is really exciting that we missed somehow. This is the time to let us know. And I says, wow, I would have never thought that that your project does that. So this is a place to sell us on your project. Okay? All right. All right, any questions? Yes?
So since we're, I guess, each of us is creating our own private GitHub repository, basically just going to do the code 2 times, right?
No, it will be one repository, and you'll invite all the other two folks to the same GitHub repository. You'll need to invite ourselves, the TAs and myself too. At some point, we'll need to clone down your repository, and since it's private, you'll need to invite us. Okay. Yes.
Okay. So if I create a many relationship between two users, so will it count as one many, or it can be counted as one many and also one user?
It's the meaning, right? It's the meaning of the relationship. Right, so if it says that I am following somebody, then that's a many-to-many, right? It's not two one-to-manys, it's one many-to-many.
No, I mean if that's a user-to-user relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means
Right, so that many-to-many has obviously it's implemented with two one-to-manys,
yeah.
but it does not fulfill the one-to-many requirement.
I know that, but that's not my question.
Okay, what?
If it's also counted as one user-to-user relationship because they are all listed in your
requirements. I believe so. Wait a minute. Let's see. Yeah, user-to-user relationship. That would count as a user-to-user relationship. Yep, exactly.